Thank you, Natasha, and good morning, everyone. I'm John Bachman. I'm the project director, and I also lead AECOM's planning practice in the DC metro area. So the ball of yarn that is Lee Highway can be teased out into 9 threads, and each of those is the subject of an element in the plan. So the analysis that we've done to date, which really has occupied the last year, this information gathering phase, has been also structured along these themes. I would recommend, if you're really interested in the depths, to go online and download the existing conditions report, which has all the data, and it's fairly in-depth. I'm just going to cover in about 10 minutes some of the highlights, and then I'm going to actually channel 2 of our experts who spoke at last night's meeting, one on new mobility and the other on biophilia, and finally I will ask Ryan to cover his part on transforming communities. So one thing we can say about having worked on Lee Highway after a year is that the conditions are very varied. It goes everything from, in the middle of the corridor, this fairly raw commercial strip streetscape with the very narrow sidewalks and the lack of tree cover and the difficulty of crossing. And if you ride your bike for another half mile down the street, you come to a place which has already been transformed into a walkable, quite livable environment with engaged streets and nice sidewalks. So there's a lot of before and after going on, and there's some places that are quite advanced and others that are still looking for some TLC. And that diversity extends into the residential areas too, where, as everyone knows, we've got great streets with tree canopy, and it's very pleasant to walk down them. And then there are other residential areas, especially some of the multifamily ones, not all of them, but some of them where the pedestrian conditions are not great. The connectivity is really quite low. That diversity continues to the street itself, the width of which varies from 40 to 260 feet, depending on what segment you're talking about. That's a 6-fold difference. I mean, some of that is explained by, the functionality of the road and the amount of traffic, but actually the traffic counts don't vary that much to justify this difference in width. And some of the wider areas are kind of, there's extra space that could be reprogrammed to something else. Other places are congested. So clearly we're going to need a kind of a different approach to different segments of the road itself. One thing's for sure, it's a barrier. If you're going north to south, south to north on foot or by bike, it's hard to get across Lee Highway, and that serves in a very general sense to basically, it serves as a barrier separating neighborhoods on the north side to the parks and schools and other community amenities on the other side, and vice versa. Part of reducing its barrier nature is going to be in creating high-quality pedestrian spaces along the road. At the end of the day, certain parts of Lee Highway are going to be more pedestrian-friendly. That doesn't mean that they won't continue to be car-friendly. I mean, it is, a national highway system road after all. It's going to have to accommodate cars. It has to be fairly easy to drive down Lee Highway. But we can bring these things in balance. Now it's easy to drive and very hard to walk. At the end of the day, it'll be somewhere more balanced. We'll see what that balance is. But whatever the balance, we're confident that in certain places along the road, we will be able to achieve, these kinds of really high-quality pedestrian spaces. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about systems, because the city is a system and composed of subsystems. And so one of them is energy, which is one where Arlington County is blazing ahead. Many of you will know that the Community Energy Plan was modified in September of last year and now sets the very ambitious goals of not only being carbon neutral by 2050, but having 100% renewable energy in the county by 2035 and 100% renewable energy for county operations 5 years from now. And I said last night, well, that's a really ambitious goal. And after the session, county board chair, Libby Garvey, came up to me and said, well, not really, because with the solar farm that we have already planned in Southern Virginia, county operations will be at 80% renewable electricity as soon as that goes into effect. So that's a good sign. There's a lot of progress going on there already. But the county goals overall, the whole county, it'll still take some doing. It's clear that there are 2 big targets. One of them is the transportation, and the other is the buildings. They represent 40 and 60% of our current energy use along the corridor, respectively. The buildings are particularly a problem in that they are old. Many of them are old and not very energy efficient. But we continue to be sanguine about the possibility of reducing greenhouse gas emissions along the highway in the future, because we have very clear-thinking population that values environmental sustainability. That, in my experience, is the #1 ingredient. We have the opportunity to pick the low-hanging fruit of upgrading the existing older buildings and making them more energy efficient. Not that it isn't expensive, but it has a high benefit-cost ratio when you take into account the environmental benefits as well as the financial ones. We are going to build new buildings in the new mixed-use nodes in certain locations, and those can be to a higher standard. And finally, we're going to build walkable urban nodes where it'll be easier and more pleasant to walk or bike, so more people can choose not to use motorized transit. So all these things we think are going to contribute to better energy performance and a lower carbon footprint for Lee Highway Corridor going forward, and that's an exciting prospect. So let's talk a little bit about stormwater, which is a big challenge for us here. One of the factors that causes flooding is the degree of imperviousness. It's not a very permeable road we have, especially in the core area. Look at all the black. The core area is bounded by gold here, so all this black here is, largely roofs, which are not green, parking lots and roads. So everyone knows there's a lot of runoff. It isn't only caused by impervious surfaces. It's also caused by storm events, which are getting more intense and more frequent, and it's caused by aging infrastructure whose capacity is not sufficient in some cases, and the result we get is flooding. This map shows a bunch of things, but just to orient you, here's the highway in the middle, and this is the study area in the yellow boundary. And the dots of the other colors represent previous floods from the past few years. So you can see the concentration in certain areas. And it's interesting that, in this part of Waverly Hills, for example, the water runs down from Lee Highway because it's on the ridge, it's the highlands. It's largely impervious. The water runs off, and it runs so fast that the ground and the stormwater infrastructure can't capture it enough. So not only does it collect at the bottom, for example, the traditional places in Inline Village and along 66, which are the low points, but it floods in the middle sometimes too. So how do we approach this problem? Well, there's some tried and true methods. We don't have to rewrite the book, but we have to deploy the good methods in the right place in the right quantity. That includes bioretention and green roofs. Basically, the idea is to capture more water and hold it for longer so that the existing system can absorb it when it comes more slowly. It's also going to require some upgrading of the trunk stormwater infrastructure. It won't be, this is part of the solution, but not the whole solution. So let's talk a little bit about the economic system. Business along Lee Highway is pretty good. First of all, you have only 3% vacancy rate in retail, 5% office. Second, a lot of the commercial facilities were built a long time ago. They're fully paid off. So they're in the black. The owners of those facilities are making money. And I think from the point of view of the consumer, a lot of you have reported that you find it pretty convenient to do your local shopping on Lee Highway. People are happy to stop by in their car, pick up what they need, head back to their house, and so on. There has been a consistent comment about the breadth of choice of retail on Lee Highway, and you have said that you would like to see more choice and in some cases higher quality retail and entertainment offering. And so it's worthwhile thinking about it from the direction of improving the selection and the retail offer on the one hand. But it's true that the places where the retail facilities are concentrated is at the major intersections with Lee Highway. These are the same places that will be redeveloped into nodes. And in the future, after that investment, the rents for retail space will go up. So this poses a challenge for some of our independent businesses and keeping the kind of retail mix that you all are looking for, and you have said very clearly you value them. So that on the one hand is kind of a challenge. Redevelopment is also an opportunity for retail to the extent that it will create more rooftops, as the urban economists like to say, more people within walking distance who can spend money in the stores and restaurants, and that will help their financial viability. So all of that comes down to a half a dozen kind of trade-offs and considerations that we would ask that you keep in mind as we start the planning work today. It's not a one-size-fits-all, so we need to think differently along different parts of the corridor. Redevelopment as a necessary thing for getting the type of urban environment and generating more fiscal revenue to pay for improvements, but also posing challenges for some of the independent retail that we have. And it will change the character, of Lee Highway. So, we need to think about do it in a way that keeps not only the kinds of retail we want, but also the mix of people that we're looking for. It gets to the social inclusion aspects of it. Public infrastructure is going to be stormwater, other facilities. Investments will have to be made. Some of these will definitely be public at the end of the day. But given the magnitude of the investment, we're going to have to think public-private partnership in some cases as well. We talked about economic feasibility, the classification of the road as a national highway, and the fact that we need to balance, as we think during the planning phase about how the nodes will evolve in the future, the amount of new people that might live there, we will consider the impact of that on our schools and our parks and our other public facilities.